There is someone who once made a quiet decision to stay far from you, and that decision had nothing to do with indifference. If anything, it came from the exact opposite place. What they felt toward you became something they did not know how to carry. It grew too intense, too layered, too threatening to the version of life they were working so hard to hold together. But something is changing in them now. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the kind of deep, underground way that eventually becomes impossible to deny. The person who convinced themselves that walking away was the responsible choice is now slowly waking up to a truth they buried underneath years of careful reasoning. This is not a surface-level moment of doubt. This is a full interior transformation, a quiet but powerful recognition that what they shared with you did not stay behind when they left. It did not weaken with time. It did not dissolve into the past where they hoped it would live quietly forever. It moved with them. It stayed present in the silence. It grew in the very spaces where they expected it to disappear. So before your mind starts telling you that they have moved on or that none of it was ever real, stay with this. Because what is unfolding inside them right now is bigger than their pride, bigger than their fear, and far bigger than the reasons they kept telling themselves. They are entering a season where truth is no longer something they can outrun. A season where the walls they built around their emotions are beginning to develop cracks they cannot patch. And if this message reached you at exactly this moment, that is worth paying attention to. Keep listening, because the reason they pulled away is finally becoming clear, even to them. And the awakening now taking shape inside them is changing the way they see you, the way they see themselves, and the way they see everything they tried so desperately to control. Some of the most meaningful connections in life do not arrive with noise or ceremony. They do not announce themselves with dramatic declarations or impossible-to-ignore gestures. They begin quietly, almost too quietly to notice at first. A glance that holds a little longer than it should. A sense of ease that feels unfamiliar. A pull towards someone that ordinary words just cannot capture. Then gradually, before either person has made sense of what is happening, something shifts at the deepest level. That is what this connection was. It did not ask permission from logic. It did not fit into any of the clean categories people use to sort their feelings. It worked its way beneath the surface until denying it became more work than feeling it, and that is precisely why they ran. Not because the bond was fragile or unimportant, but because it was strong enough to threaten the entire foundation they had been standing on. They had spent years constructing an identity built around predictability, around knowing what came next, around a sense of control that made them feel secure. Then you entered their world and made them feel something that refused to follow any of those familiar patterns. You reached parts of them that had not been touched in a very long time. You brought questions to the surface that they were nowhere near ready to answer. You made them feel more alive than they had felt in years, and that aliveness frightened them. So they created distance. They told themselves it was the smart thing to do. They told themselves it was responsible, even noble. But what they were calling wisdom was really fear wearing a composed expression. What they were calling healthy distance was really escape dressed up in rational language. What they were calling self-control was really the desperate effort of someone trying not to be pulled under by a truth too powerful to manage comfortably. Stay with this, because once they stepped back, they expected to feel relief. What they felt instead was something very different. The connection did not go quiet once they put space between you. It became louder. That was the part they had not prepared for. They believed that stepping away would loosen what they felt. They believed that physical distance would cool the emotional temperature, restore a sense of normalcy, and return them to the version of themselves they recognized. But the opposite happened. Every step they took away made the bond feel heavier, not lighter. Every silent day gave it more room to expand inside them. Every attempt to stop thinking about you only brought you more sharply into focus. This is one of the strange and undeniable laws of deep connection. Resistance does not always dissolve it. Sometimes resistance is the very thing that feeds it. The harder they pushed against the door, the more conscious they became of everything still standing on the other side. The sound of your voice stayed with them. The particular energy you carried stayed with them. The way they felt about themselves when you were near stayed with them in a way nothing else could replace. Ordinary moments started carrying your echo. A song playing in the background, a quiet room, a thought that arrived without warning and refused to leave quickly. They began realizing that you were still woven into their inner world in ways they could neither explain nor undo. Not in any visible way, not in any way they could point to, but emotionally, persistently, in a way that showed up everywhere. And that realization unsettled them deeply because it exposed the truth they had been so carefully avoiding. You were never a minor distraction to them. You were never just a passing feeling they could set down and forget. You had become part of their emotional landscape. That is why their routines could not contain what they felt. That is why this bond kept surfacing no matter how carefully they tried to manage their days. They attempted to return to life as they had known it, but that life no longer felt the same. Keep listening, because this is exactly where their real awakening begins. Not with some bold, dramatic confession, but with the slow, unsettling discovery that avoiding you did not protect them. It only deepened their understanding of how much you mattered. Let something be said plainly here. They did not avoid you because you lacked something. They avoided you because you carried too much meaning for them to hold casually. People do not pull back from what feels hollow or unimportant. They pull back from what has the power to genuinely change them. They pull back from what reaches the parts of themselves they have spent years keeping quiet. They pull back from what challenges the story they have been telling themselves about who they are. You did all of that without any effort, without performing, without demanding, without pushing. You simply showed up as yourself with an honesty that made their defenses feel thin and unnecessary. Around you, they felt exposed. Not ambushed, not pressured, but exposed in the way a person feels when someone sees them clearly without judgment. As if the hidden corners of who they really were being gently lit just by being near you. That kind of experience is beautiful and frightening in equal measure. It offers real closeness, but it also requires real honesty. It offers warmth, but it also removes the comfortable places a person hides inside themselves. For someone who has learned to survive by keeping their emotional walls high and their feelings tightly managed, that is genuinely difficult to be around for very long. So, they reached for explanations. They told themselves the timing was off, that the situation was too complicated, that there were too many outside pressures, responsibilities they could not set aside, expectations from other people, the weight of the image they had worked to maintain, the quiet conflict happening inside them all at once. Some of those reasons carried real weight, but underneath every single one of them lived one deeper truth. You made them feel something genuine enough to reshape their entire life, and they were not ready for the kind of honesty that would require. Do not skim past this part. Their silence was not emptiness. It was pressure building with nowhere to go. It was fear moving through a person trying to think their way out of something that lived beyond thought. When they were near you, something unusual would happen inside them. The armor they usually relied on began to soften without their permission. The composed version of themselves they normally maintained started to slip. Conversations with you stayed in their mind long after they were over. The quiet between words felt charged with something alive. A single glance from you could replay in their mind for hours afterward with an emotional weight that both moved and frightened them. Not because of anything you did wrong, but because they had no framework for how deeply your presence reached them. You touched something in them that had been buried under years of obligation, habit, and carefully constructed self-protection. You reflected back a version of them that felt more open, more present, more honest, and maybe even more hopeful than the one they showed to the rest of the world. And seeing that version of themselves created its own kind of pain, because once they felt it, they had to sit with the awareness of how far they had drifted from it in their daily life. You were not simply someone they were drawn to. You became a mirror. You showed them what their heart still wanted, what their inner life had been quietly missing, and what their current reality could not fully give them. That is why the connection felt like something they were not supposed to have. Not always because of some visible outside reason, but because of an interior one. It crossed the invisible lines they had drawn around their own emotional world. It reached beyond the limits they had quietly agreed to live inside. And rather than allowing that truth to land, they stepped back. They told themselves that creating distance was the mature, responsible response. They dressed it up in language that made it sound like wisdom. But somewhere beneath all of it, they knew they were not running from you. They were running from what being fully present with you would ask of them. And if this is landing somewhere real inside you right now, do not let your mind wander from it. Because what comes next is where the quiet starts turning into something that cannot be put back to sleep. Avoidance became their chosen strategy. If they could not get the feeling under control, they would control the space between you instead. If they could not make themselves stop caring, they would at least stop showing it. If they could not understand the bond, they would give it enough room and hope that the not understanding would gradually fade. That was the logic. But pulling away from a deep connection does not produce peace. It produces echo. The more distance they placed between themselves and you, the more your memory expanded to fill that space inside them. Old conversations started replaying without any invitation. Small details they thought they had let go came back fully formed. The way you used words, the quality of your attention, the particular warmth of being near you that asked for nothing and somehow still changed everything. They began finding traces of you surfacing in unexpected places, in music that caught them off guard, in quiet evenings that felt heavier than they should have, in moments when everything in their life appeared to be exactly as it was supposed to be, and yet something felt undeniably absent. Gradually, an uncomfortable recognition began forming. The distance was not keeping them safe. It was slowly revealing them to themselves. It was showing them that your absence had weight, that your presence had left something behind in them, that what they felt could not simply be filed away because it was inconvenient. This is when the epiphany started, not arriving like a sudden storm, but like a pale light pressing through the small gaps in closed shutters. It came in fragments, in moments of restlessness that had no clear source, in a quiet dissatisfaction that lived just underneath ordinary contentment, in the strange hollowness of accomplishments that should have been enough and yet somehow were not. Something inside them began asking questions they had spent real energy learning to avoid. Why does everything feel slightly different now than it used to? Why do thoughts of you keep finding their way back? Why does life feel thinner without what this connection carried in it? Once those questions are being asked, the awakening has already begun. What they are realizing now arrives with both pain and humility. They did not walk away from something minor that needed to be cleaned up. They walked away from a truth. You were not an error that needed correcting. You were a living presence that reminded them of who they could actually be if they stopped using control as a substitute for courage. You reflected emotional depth, honesty, and a kind of grounded realness that their ordinary life had quietly run out of. They saw the outline of a fuller existence when they were near you, but they also felt the cost of it. To truly choose this bond would have meant real change. Not just a shift in feelings, but a shift in how they lived, who they understood themselves to be, and what they were willing to allow themselves to want. They were not prepared for that. So instead of rising to meet what the connection was asking of them, they retreated to the familiar safety of the life they already knew. But now they are beginning to see that what looked like safety from a distance was really a form of self-abandonment. In walking away from you, they also walked away from the version of themselves that felt most awake. That is why the regret settling in them now carries so much depth. It is not only about missing you as a person. It is about recognizing what they quietly denied inside themselves. It is about seeing with clarity how fear stepped in and made choices that the heart never once agreed to. This kind of awareness is not gentle when it finally arrives. It dismantles pride. It insists on honesty. It forces a person to sit with the uncomfortable knowledge that avoidance was never wisdom. It was delay. It postponed the reckoning without ever cancelling it. And now the moment they kept pushing forward is back in front of them, asking the same essential question with a voice that has grown too steady to talk over. Will they keep hiding from what this connection revealed, or will they finally acknowledge what it truly was? Stay here, because this part matters more than it might seem. Once a person genuinely understands that their distance did not protect them from anything, they cannot fully return to the story they used to tell themselves to make that distance feel justified. The shift inside them is happening without announcement, but it is completely real. In the still moments of their life, they carry emotions they do not have easy language for. Not wild obsession, not dramatic chaos, but something quieter and heavier. A steady, low awareness that follows them. Regret that does not fully lift. A curiosity that keeps returning without permission. A respect for you that has somehow continued growing even in your absence. And underneath all of it, a deepening feeling that they may have let something genuinely rare pass through their hands without properly recognizing it while it was there. They think about the way you carried yourself through the silence between you, the dignity in how you held your ground, the patience you showed without demanding that it be noticed or rewarded, the fact that you never chased them, never pushed for answers they were not ready to give, never made yourself smaller to make them more comfortable. That stays with a person. It reflects something back to them about their own readiness at the time, and it shows them that what stood before them was not surface-level feeling, but something real and grounded. That recognition changes the entire texture of how they remember what passed between you. They now understand that your silence was not weakness. Your restraint was not the absence of care. It was the presence of self-respect. It was the quiet dignity of someone who understood their own worth without needing external validation to confirm it. And that realization unsettles them in a new way because it means they cannot frame the connection as something imagined or one-sided. They know what they felt. They know what being near you gave them. They know what they stepped back from. And that knowledge sits with them now, in the nighttime quiet, in the pauses between tasks, in the empty spaces of an otherwise full day, asking them honestly whether they truly want to keep living as though none of it ever happened. Keep listening, because their mind may still be putting up resistance, but their heart is becoming harder and harder to keep quiet. Why is this reaching them now? Because real awakening almost never comes in the middle of noise and busyness. It comes when distraction loses its grip. It comes when life slows, disappoints, or simply stops delivering the sense of meaning a person has been depending on it to provide. Something in their world has softened enough, or cracked quietly enough, for genuine reflection to rise to the surface. Perhaps a routine that once kept them effectively occupied no longer offers the same refuge. Perhaps a relationship that should feel fulfilling has begun to feel hollow. Perhaps the successes they worked toward have arrived and left them feeling flatter than expected. Perhaps the life they have constructed so carefully has started to feel too controlled, too distant from anything raw or real. Whatever the particular trigger, one thing is now clear. They can no longer think fast enough to stay ahead of their own awareness. In the quiet, your energy returns to them with a sharpness that has nothing dreamy about it. Not as fantasy, but as fact. They can see now that they did not avoid you because the connection was wrong for them. They avoided you because it was real enough to demand everything change. That is an entirely different truth, and once it fully lands inside a person, it cannot be unseen. This is the kind of realization that transforms old memories into something newly meaningful. They hear the conversations you once had in a completely different register now. They understand the silences between you with a clarity they did not have before. They begin to see that what once felt like a threat was actually honesty, and that what once felt safe was only a longer version of the same emotional delay. There is a kind of painful beauty in reaching this stage. Painful because they are now face to face with everything their fear cost them. Beautiful because the presence of awareness always means growth has already quietly begun, and growth changes the direction of everything that follows. So if you have spent time wondering whether the distance erased the mark you left, hear this without any reservation. It did not. Time did not remove you from their inner world. Silence did not erase your presence from theirs. Their awakening is itself the proof that you stayed alive in them far longer than they ever wanted to acknowledge. Now they are standing in front of a choice. Keep performing the pretense. Keep returning to the same walls and the same well-worn justifications. Or accept what this bond has been working to teach them all along. Accept that depth asks for courage. Accept that genuine feeling cannot be indefinitely contained by distance. Accept that emotional maturity is not the ability to avoid what is intense, but the capacity to remain present inside it without fleeing. This is where their inner conflict becomes serious, because recognizing the truth and choosing to act on it are not always the same event. Part of them still feels the weight of consequences. Part of them still circles around the same concerns about timing, structure, the people they are responsible to, the image they have maintained, and all the things that once seemed to make the bond feel like something that simply could not exist. But another part is building strength now. The part that has grown tired of denial. The part that knows avoidance delivered nothing it promised. The part that has started wanting honesty more than it wants comfort. And once that part gains enough ground, the old patterns start losing their hold. They may still hesitate, they may still move in ways that look uncertain. But inside them, the direction has already shifted. They are no longer asking themselves how to erase you from their thoughts. They are beginning to ask what it means that they cannot. They are no longer working to convince themselves the bond was small. They are trying to understand why it still feels so present and alive. That shift means everything. That is how the movement back toward truth begins. Long before anything is said out loud, the heart first stops arguing against what it knows. Then the mind stops fighting what the heart has already accepted. Then the silence between you becomes too heavy to keep carrying without relief. If this message is reaching you in a moment of uncertainty, let it offer you something real. Not every delay is rejection in disguise. Sometimes a delay is the slow, uncomfortable process of a person developing the capacity to face something they could not hold before. They are also seeing something now that is not easy for them to sit with. Being near you did not only stir longing or attraction, it stirred their conscience. It made them aware of the distance between how they were living and how their heart had quietly wanted to live for a long time. That gap is uncomfortable to look at directly. It raises questions no one wants to rush toward answering. Am I genuinely fulfilled? Am I being honest with myself about what I want? Have I built my life around meeting external expectations while leaving my own deepest needs somewhere outside of it? Have I confused the feeling of security with the experience of being truly alive? These are the hidden questions your presence quietly awakened in them. That is part of why the bond felt like something outside the boundaries of what was allowed. It was not simply offering closeness, it was asking for real self-examination. It was asking for a level of inner honesty that most people defer for years without fully realizing they are doing so. So when they pulled back, they were not only creating distance from you, they were stepping back from a mirror that was showing them too much of themselves at once. But mirrors do not disappear when someone turns away from them. The reflection simply waits. And now they are slowly turning back toward it. Perhaps reluctantly, perhaps with more hesitation than hope. But they are looking. They are noticing how thin other connections can feel when they lack real honesty beneath them. They are noticing how little peace there is in interactions that are carefully managed and never allowed to reach anything true. They are noticing that the particular quality of warmth and realness they experienced with you is not something that simply reappears elsewhere. This realization does not make noise, but it is relentless in the way it keeps returning. It follows them through their ordinary days and waits for them in the quiet spaces in between. Do not miss what this means. The person who once chose distance is now slowly beginning to understand that what they told themselves was forbidden may have actually been sacred, and that what they called impossible may have only ever been deeply, uncomplicatedly real. There are moments now where they allow themselves to imagine what they would say if fear were not sitting in the room with them. They picture reaching out. They picture hearing your voice again. They picture standing somewhere in front of you with fewer walls, less performance, and more truth than they were ever able to offer before. They imagine saying out loud that they were overwhelmed, that they stepped back because the bond went somewhere deeper than they knew how to manage, that they did not know how to hold something that meaningful without feeling everything in their life begin to shift. They imagine admitting that they thought space would simplify what they felt, but instead it showed them more clearly what you were to them. They imagine telling you that your presence stayed alive in them longer than their pride was ever willing to confess. In one line, the passage says that even if someone pulled away, a deep connection may still be transforming them internally, and over time they may realize the bond was meaningful, leading them toward honesty, emotional growth, and possibly a return.